Welcome back to Worst Seats in the House. Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta. No more monkeys, no more Costa Rica, no more Montreal or Boston. We are actually in the same city in Seattle, where the Wild are opening a 2-game road trip, but sort of a bizarre one where they play Seattle on Tuesday night, then have 2 off days before the trade deadline in Vancouver. It's the first time that I remember being at the trade deadline where I've not been in the at least the local city. Joe was on the road last time out a couple of years ago. And so the trade deadline for us, Anthony, will be noon Pacific, but in the Central time zone, 2 p.m. Central. And then the Wild play that night. Very rarely do the Wild play the night of the actual trade deadline. But we'll see if Friday we have a couple different guys either in the lineup or not in the lineup. We'll see.
Yeah, and I think as you and I have talked, as Billy mentioned the other day, I think it's unlikely that we see any moves of any significance between here and the deadline for the Wild, but you just never know. It has been interesting how a few times during Billy's tenure here that where you thought there was very unlikely to be room or possibility or flexibility of any kind to make a move, and then all of a sudden, somehow, some way, they figure out a way to make something work. But I would say in this case, it's probably unlikely. I don't see any way they make a deal unless it involves a player on the current roster, and I just don't know that there's a great likelihood that there's a fit with somebody that's currently on the roster to move to somebody else and bring somebody back that's at or below that dollar value.
Yeah, and to your point, one reason with the lack of flexibility is that which is good news, is that Bill Guerin, at least as of now, things can change this week if a different medical report comes in, but they are operating as if Jonas Brodin, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Kirill Kaprizov are returning this regular season. If that's the case, they are not swimming in cap space. That means they are not in season-ending LTIR, and that means that they will not have the cap space to make the move, which is why he said it would have to be a penny out, penny in type of trade. And to your point, Anthony, it's the guys that are movable, like you can move like a Jacob Lauko to another team, but that just frees you up the ability to add a $787,000 player. You can move a Declan Chisholm to another team, but that just allows you to add $1 million defenseman, a John Merrill, a $1.2 million defenseman. So, if it's penny in, penny out, you're just essentially swapping players or trading away a piece to try to just bring up somebody from the minors for the rest of the season that maybe they have down there. So, it'll be really interesting. But the Wild did make one trade this week, and that is a familiar face, somebody that you and I both respected when he was here during a short little stint, Gus Nyquist. He was actually here a couple months. We only saw him for a little bit on the ice because he was rehabbing. The Wild acquired him while he was out with what was at the time season-ending shoulder surgery. But at the time, what they did bank on was that he was going to be ready by the time the playoffs. He got 3 games at the end of the season. He had 3 or 4 points in those 3 games, and then in the playoffs, he led them with 5 assists in their 6-game loss to Dallas. What do you think of the move for a 2026 second-round pick with Nashville retaining half his AAV?
Yeah, I think it's worth a shot for certain. And the second round pick you might look at and say it's a little bit of a high price, but number one, it's a year down the road, and number two, you had to increase the package to bring him if you were going to ask for salary retention, and the Wild needed to have some salary retention to make it work. I think it's worth a shot. I think he'll help. He provides depth with a guy that can play in the top 6. He did have 75 points last year, and remember how many times last year we had fans asking us why the Wild didn't keep him instead of signing Marcus Johansson, and we had to keep answering the question that, well, it was because he was making twice as much money as Marcus Johansson, and they couldn't afford him. He's a guy that the Wild clearly would have loved to have kept after the last time they had him. And I know they really liked him in Nashville. He was a big part of their run to the playoffs last year. Billy's line this year that, we didn't need him last year, and Jess during his press conference was funny. I think it's a good move. I think it's, especially with the guys that are out right now, why not grab a guy at a relatively low price and see if you can't catch a little bit of lightning in a bottle and perhaps ignite an offense that's been stagnant.
Yeah, it's really interesting, like revisionist history. If you remember, that was the year that Alex Goligoski wouldn't waive his no trade clause at the deadline when they were in Calgary. I think there was a deal on the table to the Islanders or a team like that, and he wouldn't waive. And State decided to stay with his family and all that. That's his right. He had the full no trade in his contract. He has every right to do that. But because of that, and not being able to get rid of that $2 million, they couldn't afford to bring back a Nyquist. Now, who knows? And now, again, you never know, right? We're all assuming they would have rather kept Nyquist over Johansson, but we're also forgetting is that Johansson had a real solid run those last month and a half, that last month and a half with Joel Eriksson Ek and Matt Boldy. And so the way that they were, the chemistry that they developed, it made a lot of sense to sign him at the 2-year, $2 million deal. And that would have still been the case. So who knows? I mean, we're assuming they would have brought back Nyquist instead of Johansson, but Johansson was really good down the stretch that year. And I bet you they would have made the same move and just tried to use that money in a different capacity.
Yeah, it's possible. But I think right now the focus on when you look at this year's group and this top six that right now is without Eriksson Ek and Kaprizov, it was in need of a spark. It was in need of some kind of a jolt. And I think there's a chance that Nyquist provides it. I thought he looked good against Boston. I didn't think really anybody else on the team in terms of forwards really, it wasn't like anybody was dynamic in that game, but I thought he looked good. And now we'll see on this trip. I'd expect that we'll start to see some chemistry develop. He brings some speed, he brings some ability to score, and he's been a penalty killer. He'll help him on the power play. I think he's a guy that can help him in a lot of situations.
I agree with you. He's versatile. Remember when he was a young player in this league with the Red Wings, I think we all thought he was going to be a star. I mean, he was just super quick. I remember watching him, and he reminded me a lot of Jason Zucker in those early days as well. He was really liked here. I think that some of us all look at him as because he only played 3 regular season games and 6 playoff games that he was only here for like a week. He was actually here a couple of months rehabbing, so he got to know all these guys. As he said in his video that he did on social media that the Wild put out when Dom the Wild's team services guy brought him back into trees, like it feels like home. He familiar setting for him. So the players were really excited for him, and I do agree with you. I think that he's going to help in many different ways, and right now they obviously need it because really, even though they won last that game, it is a chore right now to score goals. Since January 1, they're bottom of the league in goals for, bottom of the league, near the bottom of the league in wins. Their special teams have been horrendous. So they needed to do something, especially with these guys out, Anthony.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at what the way that things have gone here for the Wild over the last few games, that I think there was a lot of attention made about the undisciplined mistakes they made in both Utah and Denver, and more so maybe in Denver. I thought in Utah you just have to give some credit to the opponent, but the truth is that over their last 4 games, if you go back to the Detroit game at home, I mean, they're averaging just a shade over 20 shots on goal per game, and they're generating very little offensively, 6 total goals over that 4-game stretch. They needed something, and that's. I know that Billy doesn't like to make excuses and refuses to make excuses, but to me, it looked like a team that when I say running on fumes, I'm not talking about the fact that they had played the night before. I'm talking about the fact that they looked like a team that was trying to fight their way through all of these injuries and playing without this guy, and trying to everybody else pick up the slack and do a little bit more than what you'd normally ask of them. And it looked like it was starting to catch up with the team where it looked like there was a mental fatigue, maybe as much as anything, in the game in Colorado, I felt. And maybe this can provide a little spark there where they can say, all right, at least we got something. We got somebody who can help us to make up for the guys that we're missing right now.
I completely agree with you, and I wasn't at the games, but I was definitely watching them. And the one thing that the one thing that was very clear is that the guys that you normally rely on to be reliable we're not. And that leads to me to agree with you that there was fatigue there. And a couple of those guys were Faber and Boldy. And you do wonder if, that 2 weeks while everybody was in Cabo and Turks and all that stuff is starting to catch up to them. That they've played a lot of hockey. It was a lot of practices. It was a lot of pressure. And then you come back, you're sort of excited to be back with the team. You have the really quality game in Detroit, but then all of a sudden you're just now getting back into the swing of things. And I just think it catches up to you. And the one goal I'm thinking about is the Druin goal. Like, that was a mistake there that you normally don't see Faber make it, where he's out there for a minute 40. He's probably tired, Anthony. And then all of a sudden he doesn't pay attention that the puck isn't get deep and he's going for a line change. Next thing you know, Jonas Brodin's alone on an island.
Yeah, and those are the kind of mistakes I'm talking about when I say that they just looked mentally tired, where it was the bad line changes, some strange decisions with pucks in their own zone, some turnovers and hope passes at the offensive blue line and through neutral ice, that when this team has been on top of their game, they don't make those mistakes and they require the opponent to beat you. And in this case, I didn't think they did that. Now, as I mentioned before, I really think Utah deserves credit. I thought they came out, played hard. They were fast. They were physical. Certainly the Wild weren't razor sharp, but some nights the other team just plays well. I didn't think that was the case in Colorado. I didn't think the Avs looked particularly sharp either. The Wild had a lead. The game was there to be had, and they got careless and got sloppy and got undisciplined, and it cost them a game.
I want to go through the Bill Guerin press conference with you, talk about guys like Khusnutdinov, but there was one moment of levity in the middle, toward the end of the press conference, where I basically, it almost started, the press conference almost turned to being, how about this one? You'll love this. Too positive for my liking, the way that the team is playing. So I asked him, I said to him, Billy, I know you. I cannot imagine that you were excited coming out of those buildings in Utah and Denver. And he interrupts me and he basically goes, well, just ask Anthony LaPanta what I was like in Colorado. So clearly you saw something, as he was clearly without giving away his trade secrets, clearly you must have witnessed something that he was not happy leaving that game.
Yeah, I heard a fair amount about what he thought was wrong with the team's game in Denver on the way out of the building. Let's just say that. And I happened to be the guy walking next to him. I think he started the conversation just by saying something along the lines of, I bet that was a fun one to call or something like that. And I had just responded, yeah, it wasn't good, or team didn't look sharp, and I think that was all he needed. He just needed somebody to respond to him or something, because it's about I don't know what it is, 150 yard, 200 yard walk maybe from the team locker room to the bus. And if it's 200 yards, for 199 of them, he spoke, and in loud volumes.
That is funny. Yeah, that was a funny moment during it. So let's talk about we kind of glossed over it, but the big news out of the press conference was, and again, subject to change, and we all know that things have very much changed with the Wild's injury situation, particularly with Kaprizov since day one of this ordeal. But the big news out of there was he made it extremely clear publicly that he believes that Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek and, frankly, Brodin are all going to be back by the end of the regular season. And if that's the case, come Friday, he cannot operate by just going out and pulling a Tampa Bay or Vegas and holding them out and just spending galore. And plus there's a ton of assets you have to give up to even do that. So, to me, that is great news, Anthony. Like, I would much rather them have Kaprizov come back for 2.5 weeks and Eriksson Ek back for 2.5 weeks to get ready for the playoffs than for them to go out and give out a bunch of assets for players that are going to come here and maybe not fit in right away. Then you lose these assets for a hope and a prayer. I think your best bet for this organization to make the playoffs and to go in there feeling good about themselves is to have Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek and Brodin back in the lineup at some point. And that was the big news out of the presser.
Yeah, that goes without saying that you got to have those guys back. And Billy, throughout that press conference, was vague for sure. And as you and I both know, there are a lot of times where teams they'll know a lot more than they're saying in terms of when a guy is going to come back. But in this case, I kind of got the feel like I think there is some unknown. I think they originally thought they had a timeline pegged for Kaprizov that was clearly off. I I haven't heard a specific timeline with Eriksson Ek, but it's he made it pretty clear that he expects him to be back before the season's over. And in a lot of cases, they usually have an idea that, okay, in 2 weeks he's going to be on the ice. Might not be exact. It might be that if he's on the ice in 2 weeks, does that mean he's back in 3 or 2.5 or 3.5? But in this case, I really got the feel like I think there is some unknown and some uncertainty to exactly how much longer it's going to be before we see, for sure, Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek. The Brodin injury was relatively new at the time of this press conference, so
Right.
they might still be waiting for some clarification there. But it sure sounded like they're expecting all three guys to be back before the season's over.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing. I will say I think it's starting to bother fans that they are getting, like, usually in the past covering the Minnesota Wild under the Bill Guerin regime, he's been extremely non-transparent when it comes to injuries, right? It's always up or lower, but you kind of have an idea, and they always give some sort of timeline. I don't know what's happened this season that he has totally abandoned the timeline thing, and I don't know of any other organization that does it like this. And I think fans are starting to get frustrated with it. That's what I'm seeing all over social media. These are the fans that pay a fortune, and they want to know, with the Wild having a ton of home games coming up, who's going to be in the lineup. And I do, at some time, I think they're entitled to that. When you are a season ticket holder, you are a, as organizations like to call them members, they're season ticket members. Well, you deserve some sort of, to me, transparency. And I don't know what's happened this season, but we're getting zero. And I think it's frustrating fans a lot, Anthony. I know Billy does not care, but
nor would most general managers, I think,
yeah,
at that point.
But I don't think I don't think it's at times I really don't think it's appropriate. And even yesterday when we were questioning him, he was acting like we have no right to ask these type of questions. And to me, we have every right. I mean, as reporters and covering the team, our job is to educate the fans of what's going on. And I'm glad he at least is telling us that, kind of get the expectations down for the fan base, that there's going to be a big trade at the deadline. And that I'm glad he's telling us that at least he's expecting him back for the regular season. But I've never covered this team where we have gotten no timelines on no players pretty much from day one of the season.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's just because of the sheer number of injuries this year that it seems a little more, that it's been a more prevalent part of the story, maybe would be the right way to say it. And maybe it's just been so many injuries that they're just tiring of having the conversation every day be any update on this guy, any update on this guy, any update on this guy. Because I got to tell you, I know that it's your job. I know that it's all the writer's job to ask for those updates. And our relationship with the coaching staff and with the team management staff is a little different, where we don't need to, I always feel like I don't need to know the answer to how long is it going to be before he's back. I just need to know, is he back tonight? And because that's what we're prepping for with our game. So it's very different. And for us, we might go 3 weeks without, in our private conversations with John Hines, even ask, what's the latest with this guy? And sometimes the only reason we'll even ask is because it'll be, have you thought about maybe what your lineup might look like when this guy comes back or something like that? And I get tired of every single day. It's almost like here's the reporters all have their notebook out. Any update on Lauko? Any update on Eriksson Ek? Any update on Kaprizov? And they answer it the same way every time, where I'm like, all right, look, he's going to answer it the same way. I know you have to ask it. It gets tiring just to be in the room listening to it. So I can only imagine it gets tiring for them to answer it, and probably gets tired for you guys to keep asking it. And I know you have to ask, because if it was the one day where they had an update and you didn't ask, it'd be a problem. And then all of a sudden the next day, Kaprizov's back on the ice, but because yesterday was the first time you didn't ask, you would have missed something. So everybody's got a different job to do. Everybody's got a different they've got different rationales for handling it the way they handle it. And, I think you guys absolutely have the right to continue to ask the question. And Billy absolutely has the right to not answer it. I mean, there are some times where I think he's probably being vague, and there are some other times where I do think there's a legit look. I don't know.
Yeah.
We thought he was going to
I
be
just
back
don't,
by
you
now.
know, I guess my opinion right now is I don't think he's doing himself any help, because right now fair or not, there's a lot of eyeballs and scrutiny on the Wild medical staff because of what had happened at the Four Nations, which again, we don't really know the answers. I think people are taking one situation with McAvoy and taking all their injuries that USA Hockey had and saying that things were operated poorly. But because they were the Wild, one Wild doctor and two Wild athletic trainers, when Billy comes out and constantly doesn't give diagnoses or prognoses or timetables and things like that, I think people are conflating the two and thinking that Billy just must not know and that he has no idea the timeline, and they're misdiagnosing Kaprizov and all that stuff. And I just don't think he helps himself out in that way. And it's really putting a blotch on the organization right now, because fans right now are really up in arms about this one subject, and that is the fact that they never get any sort of information on Kaprizov or Eriksson Ek. And in a market, by the way, with the Twins and the Wolves, where it just seems like everybody gets hurt in this market, and the Wild are just one of many. So I think that there's just an overall angst in the marketplace. But that's just my opinion. Let's do this. Let's take a quick break, Anthony. But I do want to tell people March 12th is our next live show. That is at Elsie's. March 12th at 7 p.m. That is our next live show, and that is at Elsie's. You looking forward to that, Anthony?
Can't wait.
Yeah,
I love going to
did you
Elsie's.
put it on your calendar?
I got it locked in upstairs right now. It's next time I get my calendar out, I'll be adding it.
Great. Let's take a quick break. Here's a word from a couple of our sponsors. Step into spring with better water. Enjoy smoother, softer skin, spotless dishes, shinier fixtures, and cleaner, softer laundry, just in time for a fresh start this season. If you're a loyal listener to the show, you know I've been a happy, satisfied customer of Aquarius Home Services for years, especially after I got their whole home Connecticut water treatment system for my house. If you're ready for a clear fix for your cloudy water, if you're ready to ditch dry, itchy skin, ugly rust stains, and spotty dishes, if you're ready for great tasting and most importantly, clean, healthy water, now is the time to try it out for yourself. Right now, you can save up to 25% off on a whole home Connecticut water treatment system during the Aquarius Home Solutions sale this March. Start with a free water test, and then you can get your home ready for spring with worry-free water. So schedule your free water analysis today by going to AquariusHomeservices.com. That's AquariusHomeservices.com. Aquarius, earning the right to be recommended. And don't forget to mention Russo sent you.
When it comes to great steaks, it's all about the marbling. And there's a 1 through 12 scale for marbling that will measure what the quality is of the steak. And for Feller's Ranch Wagyu, it's some of the best you'll find. They won't sell their steaks unless they're at a marbling level of 6 to 10 on a scale of 12. It's some of the best steaks you'll find. Just for reference, USDA Prime can be called USDA Prime as long as it's at 3 or 4 on that same scale. This steak is some of the best I've had. You can find it at fellersranch.com. Their vans are in the cities every week. They can deliver it to you. There are also a couple of spots within the cities where you can pick it up. You won't be disappointed. If you're having a great meal and you want to have steak, there's no place to go that's better than Feller's Ranch.
Keep the good times rolling without the regrets. Giggly THC beverages are your go-to for bold flavor and smooth vibes. Zero alcohol and no bad decisions. Just THC-infused cocktails, seltzers, and teas packed with natural ingredients and performance-boosting superfoods like ashwagandha and ginseng. Find Giggly at over 500 locations like Total Wine, MGM, and Cub Foods, or shop online at giggly.com. That's GIGLI.com. Ready to upgrade your drink game? Well, use code GIGLYNORTH for 50% off your first order. Giggly. Sip smarter, feel better.
Back here, worst seats in the house. Michael Russo and Anthony LaPanta, both in Seattle, where the Wild play the Kraken on Tuesday night and the Vancouver Canucks on Friday night. And that game comes, 7 hours after the trade deadline. And by the way, Anthony, I know you're not going to want to miss this. I'll be joining Kevin Gorg on Thursday, March 20th for his live Wooden Sticks podcast at Insight Brewing in Northeast Minneapolis. The show kicks off at 7 p.m., but arrive early to grab a seat, enjoy a cold beer, some delicious food, and dive into all the hockey talk you can handle with Gorgie and me. Don't miss out. Anthony, you going to come March 20th?
Well, I was just thinking that the answer is probably no. And it's I did just spend whatever it is, 3 hours on this plane ride here listening to Gorg from across the aisle in a row behind me. And it was in Denver. I took a picture of it. I was going to post it on social media. Maybe I will. They had this little canister thing of earbuds and headphones to make for a safer work environment so that you didn't hurt your ears. And I thought about grabbing a handful of them to pass them out to the people that have to sit next to Gorgie on the plane. And it, I'll just I'll wait for the summary from you and Kevin the next day to tell me what you talked about, how the show went. And I'm sure it'll be great. Kevin's I give him a lot of grief, but he is a good friend and loves the game. I'm excited for him that he's getting a chance to call some of the high school hockey tournament this week. He's going to leave us here from after the game in Seattle Tuesday night. He's going to fly back and he's going to be a part of the state tournament broadcast. How ironic is this, that Lou Nanne retires after 174 years of doing high school hockey, and he's going to be with me doing a wild game in Vancouver on the Friday night of the high school hockey tournament, while Gorg is back in the cities doing the high school tourney. So but I'm really happy for him. He's passionate about high school hockey, and he and I have called a ton of high school hockey games together over the years. And I'm excited for him to get that chance. And yeah, you guys will have fun. You'll be able to talk some high school hockey with him on that show, because that'll be after the tournament's over.
Yeah, actually, you know what we'll get to talk about is that is the day I get back actually from the GM's meeting, so we'll have plenty to talk about. And but this is exactly why, by the way, Lou Nanne retired, to give a big break to a young guy like Kevin Gorg to do high school hockey. So really exciting.
Yeah, there might have been a couple other reasons for Louis, but that's I'm sure one of them.
All right, let's talk about.
He was funny today on the plane because we were talking about some dinner tonight in Seattle, and somehow, some way, it came up that if he had invited Gorg, that it would guarantee the fact that more than one person would be talking at the same time all dinner.
All right, so that's so I take it Gorg's out on dinner tonight.
No, actually, as you know, the way it goes, Gorg goes to dinner with us about 3 times a year, and the rest of the year, his dinner is either buttered popcorn at a movie theater somewhere, or maybe a cheeseburger at Applebee's or something, where a cheeseburger and a Diet Coke, and he's done for the night. But then whenever Louie's on the trip, then it's all of a sudden, hey, we're all going to dinner. We all go to dinner. When Louie's on the trip, we all go to dinner. And so he was making sure everybody on the plane knew that we were having dinner with Lou tonight. So great. I assume that means he's in, but I always kind of believe it when I see it, when I walk in and he's sitting at the table.
That's well, it'll be an entertaining night, I'm sure. All right, let's talk more about the Bill Guerin presser, and then we'll talk about the team, and then we'll take a break. And then I got a couple stories for you from my trip, and I also wanted to tell you we got some Twitter questions as well they're pretty good as well. All right, let's talk about who.
We got some thoughts from Vinny sent to me on the plane ride today too. He's got some Vinny's thoughts he wants us to get to.
All right, let's get to. I don't know if I really want to deal with Vinny after some of our group texts this week, but anyway, so anyway,
I don't know that they're related to that, but that was kind of funny. I didn't really know exactly what it was.
Yeah,
Margot and I were sitting at dinner, and all of a sudden I looked at my phone and I said, holy cow, there must be something happening in the hockey world, because this text chain that includes you and me and a few, maybe 4 or 5 people that are all hockey guys or hockey fans, there were like 20 texts on this chain. And I said, something must have just happened in the hockey world.
Nothing happened. It was just Vinny being Vinny. And then I was silent. And then finally I decided about 24 hours later to do a little rebuttal. All right. Let's talk about Murat Khusnutdinov. So that was really interesting. So we've been talking on this podcast for a while, maybe the last month, that it's really interesting that Murat Khusnutdinov hasn't spent a day of his professional career in North America in the minors, and that maybe it would be good for him just to, feel the puck again, play power play, win some draws, produce a little bit, play the penalty kill, that it would be good for his long-term development. And I think this will be that he was sent to the minors. But what Bill Guerin did let us know yesterday is that's not why they sent him to the minors. And here is the complication. We heard about the complication, that there was some sort of complication in the Nyquist deal. And I think the big complication was, one, getting them to retain exactly half. Because I do think the Wild tried to get, called a dozen teams to try to get a third-party broker. And even though there will be third-party brokers this week throughout the National Hockey League, they were having trouble getting one that early. But when they realized that Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek would be back during the regular season, to make the trade for Gus Nyquist at $1.59 million, when Kaprizov is back off LTIR and Eriksson Ek and Brody and all these guys are back in the lineup, they are essentially not going to be cap compliant. And remember, when you are an LTIR, for that player to be activated, you have to be cap compliant. Well, they started doing the math and they realized that really Khusnutdinov needed to be in the minors probably for the rest of the season at his salary. That's why Gauntz and Short stayed and Khusnutdinov was sent down. Bill Guerin, you never hear a GM admit that you never, like in my history of covering the league, even though when you know a guy is in the minors for contractual reasons, it's never admitted. This one, Bill Guerin talked openly about how he basically had to run his business to make sure Kaprizov was back and under the cap for this organization, that they had to send Khusnutdinov down. I was kind of blown away that he admitted it the way that it was and how difficult a conversation it was. And because of the language barrier, that he first gave his agent JP Barry a heads up, explained the situation to him, then called Murat on himself. Murat really doesn't completely understand, so he tells him, call your agent. He could better explain this to you. But it was really fascinating to me that Murat has to basically pay the price for them wanting to improve by getting Gus Nyquist, which also shows you about how difficult it is going to be to make any other trades this week. If you have to essentially make roster decisions by getting rid of a player to make sure that you could afford your roster down the road.
And all of that is true. I'm in no way saying that I think Billy is being deceitful in this way. I do think that that's legit. But if Murat Khusnutdinov was producing, they'd have figured out a different solution.
Right.
And so,
yes. Right? Or killing a penalty.
Right.
Like he's one of their worst,
Yeah. And so if there was a Grand Canyon of difference between Murat Khusnutdinov and Brendan Gauntz or Shore or any of the other guys who have played in that the third and fourth line role, they would have probably tried to, there would have been another solution. In this case, because all of those guys have been roughly the same, then that becomes the no-brainer to say, okay, to make it fit, the guy who has the biggest price tag is the logical guy to go. And so I do think if there wasn't salary restraints, I don't think Khusnutdinov goes to the minor leagues, but maybe he goes to the press box,
right?
And maybe it has a similar effect. But I think so. I think it's twofold. I think yes, there is salary ramification for sure, but it's also a guy who just hasn't taken the next step this season that I think a lot of people expected that we'd see. Like, I think there have been so many times where there's been a little flash of a play or something, and then you've thought, could this be the start? Could we be starting to see a guy play with a little more confidence? I forget the game, but I remember there was a game where he scored, and then he, like about 2 shifts later, he made a play with a puck where he spun out of a check and created a scoring chance. And
was thought, it maybe at Utah the first game?
I think that's right. I think it was at Utah the first time. And all of a sudden you thought maybe we were going to start to see what we keep thinking, that there might be more there. And it just it just hasn't been there yet this season.
And to your point, like, I do think that's the stuff that Billy intentionally left out. And the question is, why did he leave it? Why did he leave it out? Just because he didn't want to skewer him publicly, or because maybe he is on the trading block as well? And I do kind of wonder if the Wild could make a move with him this week. I do wonder if they would actually do that. And again, it wouldn't probably be somebody for the team, but would you trade him for another prospect? Would you trade him for a pick? We'll see. But I thought it was really interesting because I know that they have not been thrilled with his game all season long. And for Billy to essentially make it seem like this had nothing to do with his play and all to do with Cap. Yes, that's true if you do the math. But he also has not been very good. But that's just that's just the situation there. Anything else come at you? You know, there was a lot of talk at the end of the press conference, Anthony, about the value of draft picks, and and I think that this caught a lot of Wild fans off guard. I even said earlier in the day when I heard that the Wild were going after Nyquist, I'm like, man, because I knew that their second round pick was in play. I'm like, I hope they're not about to trade their second round pick for him. But you had to up the draft pick when they retained half the contract. That's just a fact. But a second round pick is pretty hefty, right now. So were you a little surprised that they were willing to part with that?
Well, not really. And I mentioned this earlier that I think the two things initially, if you just say a second round pick for Nyquist, I would have thought it was a little hefty. But when you kick it down 1 year and then you also get some salary retention in it, I think that's probably what it was going to take. And I've always argued, I mean, draft picks are valuable. Don't get me wrong, and you have to have them to build the depth in your organization. You have to have them if it's for no other reason than to use as trade chips. But the truth is that so many times, if you're trading a pick that's outside of the first round, maybe let's say outside of the second round for sure, it is almost never that pick winds up to be as good a player as the player you're acquiring in this trade. And so I think sometimes, there's not to be dismissive about it, but there are some times where I look at it and think, what difference does it make if you give a third or a fourth round pick? If this is the guy you want and this is the guy that fits your team and brings what you're looking for, then make the deal, because the odds of that pick turning into a player that helps you more or even anywhere close to as much as what this guy is that you're bringing in, even if it's for the rest of the season, are just slim. And so I thought that was interesting. The other part was that there was some talk about Khusnutdinov going down. There really nobody talked about the fact that Liam Ogren was going down with him.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is a guy who I think at the start of the season there were certainly higher hopes for where he would be at this point. Now, once he went to the minors the first time around, I really think they were hoping to just let him sit down there, let him work down there for the rest of the year, kind of like they did with Matt Boldy for that half a season when he went down, and be patient. But the injuries necessitated him coming back sooner than I think they wanted to bring him back, sooner than for sure than he was ready in their eyes. And, I think his game has been better in terms of just responsibility and accountability, but he just hasn't brought anything offensively yet. And I just don't know that he's ready yet to be a contributor in the NHL. Clearly he's not. So maybe if the rest of this season in the American League could be that, and next year is the year where we see if this guy is can become a legitimate middle of the lineup NHL player. But I thought it was interesting that there was some talk about Khusnutdinov going down, but nobody even asked about Liam Ogren going down. This is a first round pick.
Yeah. Well, I asked about Liam Ogren. He's like, well, we needed roster spots. So,
yeah,
which I get as well.
So, hey, this is kind of a good segue. One of Vinny's thoughts, and now I know you're a little riled up about Vinny and his AI generated questions in our text chain the other day. But so one of his thoughts was, he said, I went back and listened to some previous shows, and over the last couple of years, Russo has made the argument that players in the Wild organization are being blocked. And among them were Marat Khusnutdinov, Liam Ogren, Sammy Walker, Adam Beckman, Brandon Duhaime.
All right, first of all, there's no way he went back and listened to a bunch of shows. And two, there's no way that he wrote this. This is you.
No, he did. I'll forward you the text. And he said, and the players that were said to be blocking them were most often Marcus Foligno, Marcus Johansson. Hold on, I think I have to mute you. Nope, he said Foligno, Johansson, and Gaudreau were the three players that were usually blocking him. And his question is, does Russo think there are players being blocked right now? So I don't even know that he was trying to get under your skin with previous arguments, but he's curious if you think there are guys now that are being blocked in the organization.
Well,
And
I would,
because these guys clearly are not. I mean, they clearly haven't.
yeah.
When given opportunities, they haven't taken it and run with them.
Yeah, Khusnutdinov was here all year, was not blocked, and did not perform well. I would agree with you that Ogren is not ready, and that was the big fight that you and I had at the beginning of the season, where I said that Ogren should be on that second line left wing. You said Johansson should. I don't think either should, quite frankly, but certainly Ogren is not ready.
If those were our two options, 90 was a better choice than 28.
Yeah. But man, I Johansson has actually played quite well the last two games. Had assists on each of their goals here, on the Zuccarello and the Goudreau winner the other night. But man, I just cannot believe that a guy could play 50 games, all top 6 minutes, and have 5 goals. Like, it's to me quite disappointing. In a year where I don't care what expected goals say and all that stuff. Like, to me, their depth scoring all year has been a problem. I know that we always harp on the third and fourth lines, but their second line has been really, really disappointing this year. And it's whoever's on that line. Like, their expected goals might be through the roof, but they don't produce. And that goes with Eriksson Ek. That goes when Boldy's there. Like, it's just
Yeah, I don't think that. I think you're exactly right. To me, that is where the depth scoring. If you had gone into this season and said that the third line guys, which to me were Goudreau and Foligno, and then probably Hartman, were your third line. Now, Hartman's been disappointing, and obviously the suspensions and everything have derailed his season, but they've gotten everything you could ask for from Goudreau and Foligno. Those two guys have been terrific this year. Where the biggest hole that this team has, where they've fallen short of expectations, is the second line. Because that second line, whether it was going to be Boldy, Eriksson Ek, and Johansson, or whether it was going to include Rossi, whatever it is, if Eriksson Ek was going to play with Kaprizov and Zuccarello, that second line, Eriksson Ek's year has been off. Johansson, who I think his game has been good, he just hasn't scored, but none of the guys in that line have scored. And I think, so the point that you were making is that you're in the top 6, you've played 50 plus games, and you have 5 goals, and what does he have, 20 points, I think, or 22 or something like that. Mm-hmm. But the truth is, the reason why you would normally say that if you're playing in the top 6, it would be because your second line would have contributed 40 goals. And you'd say by accident, you'd pick up a goal here and an assist there, but that line just hasn't. And some of it's been injury, because they've had to push guys that normally would have been on your second line up to the top line. But even when healthy, that line just hasn't been nearly as good as what they were hoping it was going to be. And part of that is that I don't think Boldy's game was great when he was playing with Eriksson Ek and Johansson. I just think it's been a bad combo of guys having a down year, because I really think Johansson's game has been about what you would hope to get from Johansson. Yeah. It's just that the line hasn't scored, so his point total is down. He's not a guy that's going to drive the line with scoring on his own. But, if his play's been good enough to be a 35 to 40 point guy, which is kind of what we talked about all year, is that, look, if he's 35 or 40 points for a couple $1 million, that's what it costs to get 35 or 40 points these days. Now, he's going to fall short of that. Right now, what would his pace give him? Somewhere around 30, probably. And, so you might say, well, what's the difference between 30 and 35? Well, that's 15%. So it is a difference. But I think it's been tough, because you've had the full lineup so infrequently to be able to say, yes, our second line has done enough or hasn't done enough, when it's been a revolving door of who's been a part of it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Let's do this. Let's take a break. But when we come back, you mentioned line driving, and I want to talk to you about Matt Boldy, and then we'll get to Twitter questions as well. We'll be right back on Worst Seats in the House.
Hockey isn't the only thing happening on the ice, and as lakes are freezing over, it's time for ice fishing. OnX Fish offers the most comprehensive fishing tools for increasing your confidence and success on the hard water. Use the Fish app to find new places to fish and sort lakes by species, abundance, trophy, and keeper potential. OnX Fish also shows you hotspots, lake-by-lake regulations, and private and public land ownership information. For a limited time, download OnX Fish for free in Minnesota and Wisconsin, or go to onxmaps.com/fish to get more information on the app that is changing the game on ice.
Boost your savings when you open a money market account at Royal Credit Union. For a limited time, you can get a $1,250 bonus when you bring $100,000 or more in new money to open a personal or business money market account. Royal's money market accounts have no monthly maintenance fee and tiered rates, so higher balances earn more. See details and open a money market account today at rcu.org/earn-more. Minimum deposit of $100,000 required to obtain bonus. Offer ends 5/24/25. Insured by NCUA.
Hey, have you been dreaming of a lake cabin lifestyle with boating, fishing, and family fun in northern Minnesota? Well, lately I've thought a lot about how cool it would be to have a getaway like so many Minnesotans. And if you're like me, you probably think that owning your own lakeside getaway is beyond your budget. Well, if you think lake cabin real estate prices keep going up, well, think again. This is Russo, and I'm here to tell you there is an affordable way to enjoy a cabin lifestyle and all that goes with it. And yes, I said affordable. I founded a Clamshell Beach Resort, which is located on the Whitefish chain of 14 lakes for you and your family to enjoy. Here's how. Clamshell has lake homes that offer deeded fractional ownership, and the keywords there are deeded and fractional. You own it. Imagine having 5 weeks a year to enjoy Clamshell with its beaches, pool, and lodge that's full of kids' activities. Is golf your game? There's a great golf course right across the road. Like winter sports? Well, you can go ice fishing, cross-country skiing, or snowmobiling right out the door at Clamshell. And there's no maintenance, no grass mowing, no snow removal. It's done all for you. And you can own a share of Clamshell Beach Resort at an affordable price. To learn more about ownership opportunities at Clamshell Beach Resort, go to cottagesonwhitefish.com or contact Pat Egan at 612-220-9819. That's cottagesonwhitefish.com or Pat Egan at 612-220-9819.
Back here, Worst Seats in the House, Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta. Final segment of the show. March 12th is our next live show. That's at Elsie's at 7 p.m. And then we'll have a couple shows in April as well. And I mentioned that on March 20th at Insight Brewing at 7 p.m. I'll be on with Gorgie as well. So definitely come on out for that. I believe I got the right time, 7 p.m. If not, we'll correct that. All right. Anthony, you mentioned driving with Johansson. I got to talk to you about Goldie. Like, are you a little disappointed with his play of late? Like I just think that we look at him. I remember right at the beginning of the year writing a story like there's no rule against having two superstars when he was playing so well and he was a point a game guy and all that stuff. And now Kaprizov's been out of the lineup since, pretty much early January, really December 23rd. And it just feels like now is the time where with the team struggling that you just want him to be the guy to step up on an every night basis. And sometimes we see it like in Detroit, but most of the time we don't. And I just don't know what's going on with him. Like there's no elevation in his game to be the guy to drive with whoever he's with. I mean, do you agree at all?
Yes, I do. I think his problem is he's just been too streaky to be, and a superstar, a guy that you're going to lean on to carry your team can't be streaky. And I think the recent stretch was a perfect example. He had a stretch where I think he had 14 points and it was either 10 or 11 games. And it capped with 3 assists in Chicago. And then we hit the road for that trip to Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, Boston, right before the Four Nations break. And he went scoreless on the whole trip. Yeah. And it added to it that he didn't score against Carolina when we got home. It was 5 games in a row without a point. And those are the kind of stretches that we've just seen too often from him. So I think his game at times still gets too perimeter. And I don't think that's stepping out of line to be critical that way. I think he's still, when it's all said and done, you're looking at a guy that isn't that far off from a point a game player. And if you're going to talk about a guy and say it was a down year, and I think he has 52 points right now in 60 games, so you're on pace to end up somewhere right around 70. Well, if for the rest of his career, if 70s is his down year, you're talking about a really good player. But I think we both just thought there was a possibility that he all of a sudden this year maybe scores 80 or 85. And I still think that's in him. I hate to keep going back to injuries, but everybody's numbers are down when the guys that are have been out of the lineup are out as much as they've been. And think about how much of the power play time has been without Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek, and how many more points Boldy probably picks up if the power play is clicking with those guys on it. We've seen when they had their top 5 on that power play and they'd get that puck whipping around, they looked like they had a chance to be one of the elite power plays in the NHL. But they just haven't had all those guys together often enough to pile up numbers. And then you look at a normal game flow and you say, okay, what if Boldy's playing on a second line with Eriksson Ek and Johansson, or Eriksson Ek and now Nyquist or whatever, and they're not facing the other team's best shutdown guys because Kaprizov, Rossi, and Zuccarello are drawing those guys? Well, now how many more points does Boldy have? And, so I think there are some contributing factors that might be out of his control, but I do think his game hasn't been consistent enough. And sometimes the best way to get consistency is if you are playing the game the right way every night. So if you're a perimeter player, there are going to be stretches where the puck's not going in. But if you're a guy that is playing in straight lines and going hard nose to the net, now those cold streaks are fewer and further between. And look at how long this year Marco Rossi went with only one time being shut out in back-to-back games. It's because he scores so many of his goals from right in front of the net. And we had a graphic the other night. He had 16 of his 21 goals had come from 16 feet or closer. And I think he was 8th in the league in terms of the highest percentage from that range. And that says something. That's why you find your way onto the score sheet almost every night, even on nights where your game's been off.
It's like maybe Vinny, since he's an archive specialist, can look it up. But about 6 or 7 pods ago, I actually made that joke. I said, "Could you imagine how many goals Boldy would have if he went where Rossi went?" This year, Boldy, from November 23rd to January 2nd, had 2 goals in a 20-game stretch. And in his last 15 games, he's gone 13 without a goal. Last night was a good sign. He had 8 shots on net. So, he's just got to, start shooting the puck more. But I want to see him take charge on the power play. I mean, he is, like, to your point, he is so beyond perimeter. Like, I don't know where he expects to score goals from. Like, most goalies are not being beaten from where he's shooting the puck from, and he's got to get to the interior. And, I just think, for a team that since the beginning of January is like 29th in goals for, and their power play is garbage, and we know their penalty kill is garbage, and they're giving up a ton of goals. Like, this is like, now is the time, man. Like, Eriksson Ek's gone, Kaprizov is gone. You're the $7 million man right now. Like, let's see, show that you are a star, that you're a go-to guy, and not just a, one of many good players on a team. Like, he should be the guy stepping up on an every night basis. We see it, routinely from Rossi, but I just haven't seen it enough from Matt Boldy. That's just, my opinion. You want to do Twitter questions, or you have anything else in your mind?
Let me.
By the way, I got to tell you a funny thing. So I'm at the airport the other day, and it was like, honestly, and I had like a 6 a.m. flight. So right away, I'm just going to be a grouch. Okay. I've never seen this in my entire life. So I get on an escalator, and the guy that's like 5 or 6 steps ahead of me loses his luggage, and it comes crashing down. And I luckily was able to not get hit with it. I grabbed it for him. Okay. But then later, like, we go through security, and from the top row all the way to the bottom, a woman drops her luggage and takes out another woman on the bottom of the stair. I don't know the woman just like froze and got hit with this luggage. So I've never seen that in all my years of traveling. I've never seen somebody actually drop a bag on an escalator. I saw it twice in like a span of like 25 minutes. Okay. Then I get to the gate, and again, we're talking it's 6 a.m. flight, Anthony. And the gate agent, who's a cool dude, but it was like he is just putting on a show with the speaker. He's constantly making announcements. Then he has the plane was empty that I was on. He has a contest, and you know that I didn't take part in it. Whoever could do the most push-ups would get upgraded to Delta Comfort. Luckily, I was in first class, so I didn't have to do it. But I'm just like, dude, it is 5 a.m. and can we just all like just dial it down a notch, okay? He's like you would have thought he was doing stand-up comedy. Then we get on the plane, and the person next to me, after every announcement by the flight attendant or the captain, yelled out loud, "Thank you." That was kind of like my final straw. Okay. I finally said to her actually something. I'm like, "Ma'am, come on, man. It's 6:30 in the morning. Like, we don't need to yell thank you here." Okay. Like it was nice. A crazy morning.
All right, before we get to your Twitter questions, you were just talking about Marco Rossi.
You have no comment, no response to any of this?
Yeah, I find it amusing. And none of it surprises me with you. I mean, that just seems like where you'd find yourself.
Yeah, exactly. It was not a fun morning.
So one of Vinny's other thoughts was regarding Marco Rossi, and he just said there's been so much talk about what does it look like? Is he part of the future? What is your actual prediction for what his contract will be that is signed? And he added to it that he said, in my opinion, I'm not sure I would pay him if I didn't see him as a long-term number one center. So that's his opinion. So what if you had to say right now, we've broken down all the different reasons why or why not or whatever. What do you think the contract is? What's your best guess right now?
I think it's a bridge. I just don't know what they're going to pay him. Like, this is a tough one for me because I still think sanity is like should and could prevail here and that they keep him. But I also think that they have a price point that they think that they are not going to go higher. And I don't think it's right, but I don't think they want to go higher than Matt Boldy. And there is just no way, unless Marco is like, that's fine with me. I just can't imagine his agent, Ian Pulver, who's an really quality agent, is just going to sit there and say, all right, we're going to 2 years after Boldy take 7 times 7. The numbers say that he should make more than that. And I don't think the Wild want to go more than that. So that's where I just, I wonder if they're willing to pay him that. And, if Dylan Cousins is not traded in the next couple days, I think the Wild are going to have significant interest in him this offseason and will try to make a move for him. And if they do, and they get him at 7.1, that could spell them saying, you know what, now we're going to put Rossi on the block. Because I don't know if they're going to pay Dylan Cousins 7.1 for the foreseeable future and then go give Rossi more than 7 or 8, So I just don't know. I can't give you an answer here because while I think it makes all the sense in the world to sign him, everything that I'm hearing, the way negotiations are going is that the Wild have put their foot in the sand and are not willing to give him much more than, what at least Pulver thinks is his market value.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of that's true. That's why, to me, the deal that makes the most sense has always been a bridge deal, and I think the bridge deal price probably has gone up with what Rossi has produced this year. And I think it probably still lands somewhere in that area where it's 4 years, and it might start to get toward that number that you're talking about for the 7-year deal, just because you've got a lot of factors here. The cap's going up. And maybe now he's a guy that, all right, we don't want to lock you in for 7 or 8 years right now at a big number, but we'll give you a 4-year deal at a little bit bigger number, and then you're a free agent at a younger age when you can go command a bigger deal.
Yeah.
So maybe it ends up being a 4 times 7 bridge deal.
And, and again, I just can't imagine that they would do that because everything I hear is they don't even want to go higher than Byfield, so on a bridge. But, as Bill said, he doesn't have a lot of work to do this week. if there are not a lot of trade talks that they could even really entertain, and if that's the case, maybe they start to reengage Ian Pulver and even could surprise us with some sort of contract extension. As of the other day, that wasn't in the cards, but sometimes when two sides want to get to the nitty gritty, I think that you can get a deal done. And the one thing that even Bill Guerin brought up during the pressers is Marco's constant production and the areas he goes to the rink and which is the goal crease, as you mentioned, and things like that. So he has been their most consistent player. The other thing about him is that he never misses games, knock on wood. And for a team that, is as brittle as them, there's so many guys on this team the last couple of years that you cannot rely being in the lineup on an everyday basis. Marco Rossi is the one guy that has been in the lineup every single game the last 2 years. And I think that can't be taken lightly. Would you agree?
No, I think that's a big factor. Yeah. And
he's been playing. Trust me, he was playing with a significant injury this season. He was playing right through it about a month ago. I saw it, and other guys, it seems like, would have taken themselves out of the lineup, and Marco just played right through it.
Yeah, I think he's been I think the guy has done everything that you possibly could have asked of him for this season, and I just think I've always been a believer. I know last summer we were having these conversations a lot, and you were, in your reporting, were pretty convinced that he was going to be dealt at some point during the summer. And I just kind of kept saying, like, I wouldn't give up on this guy. I think this guy's going to be I wouldn't move him. I certainly wouldn't feel forced to move him. So if you got a deal that blew your doors off, well, then obviously you take it. But other than that, I was like, why force yourself and feel like you have to trade a guy that I really think was a guy that was on the right trajectory with his career. And we've seen that this year, where for all the things we talked about earlier, with the way he plays, the way he scores, the consistency that he brings with his effort, I think all of that stuff is worthy of giving the guy at least a few more years to see. The point Vinny made in his Vinny's thought was that, in his opinion, he doesn't want to pay him that big thing unless you project him to be a number one center. And I don't know if you know that yet. I don't know if you know that on a Stanley Cup contender, he can be a number one center. But
I think that's their biggest question. Like, I think this playoff will be really big for Marco in his future here. If he goes into the postseason and produces and is the same type of player, I think that will sell them. If he flounders, I think that might be that might speak volumes to them as well.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But to me, I still think if you start to look at, like, if these are the numbers, and you might know more than I do. I really don't spend a ton of time looking at what numbers are for guys, but let's just say $7 or $8 million a year. I don't know. Do you have to be a number one center to warrant that and make it worth that? Make that be worth it, or could your number two center make that much money and still make it be a valid contract and a good contract and a team friendly contract? I don't know. I think it probably could, especially when you start to look at the guys around you, where you've got Eriksson Ek on an unbelievable team contract, and so now all of a sudden you start to look at your lineup down the middle, and if your third line center is underpaid and your second line center is a hair overpaid, that maybe that just washes out.
Yeah, right. All right, a couple questions. Mike Stang asks, do you think the Wild take a run at Rantanen in the offseason? The only way is if things go awry with Kaprizov. I can't see a way that they could afford both for what they are both going to want. I mean, so to me, if the Wild start doing stuff like that, it means things are not going well with Kirill. Somebody asked, what did you witness after the game with that Billy G referenced? We talked about that. If the Canucks trade Petey this summer, should the Wild go after him, and what would you give up? I would give up nothing. What would you give up? Elias Pettersson.
That's about the same as would be in my wheelhouse. I not the guy that I think is the right fit, and not the guy that I think is what this team is missing.
Yeah. Rock NHL, do you guys think the Wild are making a mistake not LTIRing Kirill and Ek? Every other team with injuries is doing it. Every other team is not a lock to make the playoffs, or is a lock to make the playoffs. And you just don't play games. I mean, if Kirill, Kaprizov, and Eriksson Ek are ready by the end of March, you can't say to each of them, you're not playing for 2 more weeks. I don't care what the Tampa Bay Lightning did with Kucherov. And say what you want about Mark Stone and all that. Mark Stone had legitimate back surgery. And by the way, when he came back, he was awful in the playoffs. So like Kirill Kaprizov has made it extremely clear that he needs a runway to get ready. You just don't take him out of the lineup if he's ready to play. That's not the way you operate. So, that's my opinion. What's yours, Anthony?
Yeah, they're not. You're not going to play games with this and say, let's hold a guy out. I mean, if he's ready to play, he's going to play.
Right. And again, like I don't know who you even go after that makes it even worth it to, like, you're going to keep Kirill Kaprizov out and Eriksson Ek out to go and overspend for Brock Nelson. Is Brock Nelson going to give you what Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek can do? Like, it just, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense. Faber X Boyam says, does Patrick have a spot here, or will he be moved or rot in Iowa? It wouldn't shock me if they are considering moving him, because obviously Juracek is above him in the thing. It wouldn't shock me if he just says, you know what, I'm going back to Czechia. But I would agree with you. It seems like he's on the outside looking in. Let's see. Latest on Brock Besser, Wild Boys asks. Right now, it doesn't look like things are going well with contract negotiations. Everything could change in a matter of time. It's been reported that they offered him a sort of a 5-year deal at $40 million at some point this season. That's no longer on the table. So it sure sounds like there's a chance that he could be traded this week. So we will see. Trying to think, Anthony. Somebody asked me when your contract is up, do you want to stay covering the Wild or move on to a different team? I never move to a different team, but I've actually signed a new contract. So you're stuck with me for about 4.5 more years. Anthony, you excited about that?
Good for you.
Yeah.
I'm very excited. No, you told me you were in the midst of some negotiations and some talking, but you never told me it was done.
Oh yeah, we got it done. Actually, during the I think late January we got it done. Early February, I can't remember. Your off season asks, is the Brock Nelson dream dead, or at least until free agency? I would say so. I just think that, again, the Wild cannot make it work if Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek are back. So if they're not LTI'd for the rest of the year, or Brodin, or somebody else gets hurt tomorrow in Seattle, I think it is. And again, lots of teams are going after Brock Nelson, which means the price is high. And if Lou Lamoriello trades him, I just don't know if the Wild are at this point going to, have the assets. So they just didn't want to wait. One big thing that I heard from inside the Wild is that they were not convinced from their conversations with Lou Lamoriello that they were even going to trade him. And that's why they just said, you know what, we got to start to move on and find somebody right now. And that's why they made the move with Gus Nyquist. There were a lot of teams, by the way, after Gus Nyquist, Anthony. One team that we know of is Columbus. They were after him. Makes a lot of sense. One, he started, he was there. And the other big reason is Dean Evison had him and respected him. So let's wrap up on that, Anthony. How about the job Dean Evison is doing this year?
It's unbelievable, and not surprising. In fact, I forget who I was talking to yesterday about this, that it's not surprising at all to see. I mean, I thought Columbus was a great fit for him. There were a couple of those jobs when all those coaching jobs were available that I just thought, that doesn't seem right. But Columbus, when it came available, was one. That's the kind of, he's going to take that team and get them to play their ass off and compete. And I think when you consider everything they had to deal with in the offseason, and the fact that he's got them sitting inside the playoffs right now, I think is really a testament to Dean. I think he's done a terrific job. It's a team that I like their young skill. They've got some players, and this is a team that's going to be a handful in the next couple seasons. I'm not saying that they still don't have what some of those elite teams in the East have, but I think this is a team that is going to be a fun team to watch over the next couple seasons. And Good for Dean. I'm happy for him.
Yeah. Last couple, Anthony. Greece asks, do you think the Kirill Kaprizov injuries affect his contract numbers? I don't. I think they have no choice, but it is concerning. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. I mean, I think all these wild injuries that we've talked about there's been too many of them to say that you can just keep dismissing them and saying that one doesn't matter, that one doesn't matter, that one doesn't matter. But at the same time, there is something to be said for, I mean, a guy blocks a shot and breaks a bone. That's a lot of guys block shots and don't break bones. There is a flukiness to it for sure. And I don't think it's immediate with all of them that it has to be, well, now this guy's injury prone, or now I'm concerned about this guy. But yeah, I mean, it's when you've had this many guys out for 2 years in a row now, it does make you start to scratch your head and say, what in the world is going on?
Well, man, the timing, Eriksson Ek's timing is just terrible. This is 2 times the last 3 years of getting the similar injuries at the worst possible time. And even the Wild they have no idea when this happened. Like, apparently Eriksson Ek doesn't even know. Like you start to wonder if he went to the Four Nations hurt with this, and the Wild claim no, and he says no, and he came back, he practiced, then he plays in Detroit, he was unbelievable, then he comes back and practices again, and suddenly he gets off the ice, he takes his boot off, and he can't even walk, apparently.
And I actually thought that game in Detroit was one of his better games of the year. Oh my God.
Yeah, he's the one that set up the winner, by Rossi. So very, very bizarre. And then Brodin comes back for 7 games after his injury and blocks another shot. He's out again. I remember about a couple months ago, you and I were talking about Spurgeon and Brodin and the number of games they missed, but this is getting really concerning in my opinion on how often Brodin, like, you need guys you can rely upon, and these guys are always out of the lineup. And as good as Brodin is when he's in the lineup, it just kills you when he's out. And you do wonder at some point if Bill Guerin in the off seasons are going to have to look to maybe remedy that. I know we can't all imagine life in Minnesota without Jonas Brodin, but you can't also have him playing 50 to 60 games a year. It's just too problematic what it does to your roster and the upheaval it causes. And it happens too often. And I get what you're saying, that, sometimes you block a shot and you break something, but it just seems to happen to him a ton.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens with it would be different, I think, if you were talking about guys with, joint issues or soft tissue type injury, the things like that, where it's, okay, once those start, they sometimes never end. But with some of these, it's been more freak things, where it's the hit Spurgeon took into the boards was, that has nothing to do with being injury prone. That just has to do with a guy made a cheap shot.
Right. And all the others, I would agree with you. I mean, Zuccarello on the Faber one, and obviously Eriksson Ek at the beginning of the year when he was elbowed by Adam Larson and all that type of stuff.
Right.
All right, Anthony, that sounds like a wrap. Looking forward to seeing you at dinner in a little bit. Our next live show again is March 12th. That's at 7 p.m. at Elsie's. March 12th, 7 p.m. at Elsie's. Anthony will come to that, and he also promises to come to the Kevin Gore show that I'm going to be a guest on, right?
Yeah, maybe.
All right. Thanks to our awesome sponsors, Aquarius Home Services. This is the Aquarius Home Services studio. Aquarius Home Services is your local authorized dealer for Connecticut water treatment systems, Clamshell Beach Resorts, Twill in the Edina Galleria, Feller's Ranch, Giggly THC Beverages, Onyx Maps, and Royal Credit Union. Talk to you next week, everybody.
So much coming out, there's nothing going in. I know that you feel like you're never gonna win. Oh, but the world